Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us. We had a pre-call about a week ago, and I started the pre-call by saying, gee, we should talk about big macro topics. You know, what's going on in US, China, and gee, what do we think about slowing growth in China, and boy, what's happening in Hong Kong? And the sage counsel I got from our distinguished panel was to say, no, you're actually missing the big story on China. And the big story on China today is the rise of the real private sector led by e-commerce and technology companies. So let's talk about that a little bit and then broaden out. So the first observation, I was at a board meeting, the Tsinghua Business School board meeting in October, where Mark Zuckerberg famously spoke in broken Mandarin about his wife, his love of the Chinese market and the future of Facebook. That was pretty important, but I was actually struck by a graph that the head of McKinsey for Asia presented, and the graph showed the vertical growth in e-commerce in China, with the Chinese e-commerce market already being larger than the US e-commerce market. Quite a remarkable statistic. So not only bigger, but passing the US at an incredible rate. So let me start with you, Gang. What's the view from Yihaodian? Why is the Chinese market growing so fast? Is it because consumers are more comfortable online, or because you guys are better at doing the business?
Okay, thanks, Jeff. E-commerce has been the hottest industry in China for the past 6-7 years. And you mentioned that e-commerce has passed US during the past year. In fact, it passed US in all different aspects, in terms of the scope, scale, and in terms of its penetration, and in terms of its acceleration. So you can see that in the foreseeable future, in the next decade, 10 years, I think e-commerce is still going to be the hottest industry in China. There are several reasons of that. I think, first of all, China is a very suitable place for e-commerce due to its population density and due to its lack of convenience of shopping. And in the past, there are several barriers, and two major barriers were, one is the online payment. The other barrier is last mile delivery. Okay, those has been conquered during the past few years. As you can see that, people have all different kinds of payments, online payments. Even if you don't have an online payment, you can pay it COD. So people have ways of solving these problems. But why it accelerates faster than US? I think it's largely due to the mobile digital phone, smartphone penetration.
Which is already higher than the US, right? And there are more Chinese connected by smartphones than but to the internet?
Let me give you some numbers. Yeah. So as Wharton graduate, we give you numbers.
I can't be fast and loose with the data if we're supposed to respect the analytics.
So beginning of last year, the smartphone users in China has exceeded 500 million. And PC users was 590 million. But growth rate of smartphone in China has been 19%, 19.6%, so close to 20%. But PC user growth rate was 6.8%. So you can see that by next year, the smartphone users will exceed that of PC users. So you can see that that is going to exceed that of PC users. So you can see that in the future, the battlefield for e-commerce will be on the mobile devices.
So that raises very interesting questions about opportunities for you and other Chinese companies in other markets with great smartphone penetration, Southeast Asia, Africa. But let's hold that for a second. Let me ask you, Chang, to follow on from that. So you were telling me that private equity and venture capital are the hottest parts of the capital market in China at the moment. Most people, I think even most people who read the business press wouldn't know that, because the stories in the business press are just about the gargantuan Chinese banks with the largest asset bases in the world. So So give us your sense of the Chinese capital markets and in particular, you know, the rise of quote unquote alternative investments, the kind of thing that we wouldn't associate with the Chinese market.
Well, one thing that China distinguishes itself from some developed country is the vitality of the private sector, especially entrepreneurialism. When young people graduate from university, they're thinking about becoming the next Jack Ma or the next Pony Ma. And the rate of creation of new companies is astounding. And also because of the success of these new e-commerce companies on NASDAQ, on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, people look up to these new companies and they create businesses. The large population in China and the huge consumption power makes it possible for a company to grow from a very small size, from a standing start to a huge company. Xiaomi is a great example. 4 years old, now it's worth $50 billion.
But they're not getting any of their money from the cashed up state-owned banks? The
banks
capital markets
are
work differently?
The banks are dinosaurs. These companies, the Chinese banks,
what are they doing with all that money, by the way? If
they're channeling the money into state-owned companies.
Okay, still, so it's just that circle.
They're asset-based lenders.
Yes.
And these new companies are cash flow-based businesses, and they're really creating new business models for which you have no reference for the old banks. So for example, we invested in a new company called Kodai, which was started by a 28-year-old guy who saw the opportunity to challenge Alibaba. He said, Alibaba, their Achilles heel is the mobile computing. So Alibaba is more based on desktop search, and he wanted to create a mobile-based e-commerce platform. So he also said, in searching for information, you have Baidu. In social media, you have Tencent, but you don't have a search engine for goods. So he created this company from nothing, and he was able to persuade the CTO from Baidu to join him as a small team. So we invested in the company when he had no revenue, not even a set business model, for $70 million pre-money valuation. Fast forward to 2 months ago, he raised $150 million at a $3 billion valuation with 4 million merchants online. The transaction volume is already approaching half of Jingdong's.
So is the money being raised from global brand name firms or from Chinese VCs and Chinese private equity firms?
It's a mixture of both. So you have people like DST, which is Digital Sky. It's a Russian venture capital firm, but it's putting up $1 billion a pop in new investments. And Tiger and these like hedge fund like entities, but also China-based venture capital firms.
Okay, so you're telling a story about capital flowing into technology firms. I want to ask Gang a question that I can't resist asking him, which is, Walmart now owns 51% of your company. What's it like having Walmart as the #1 shareholder? Walmart, of course, as we know, tried to penetrate the Chinese market a long time ago,
right,
and hasn't done very well. So they did very well sourcing goods in China, just not very well selling in China. So they needed you to sell in China?
Yeah, Walmart has clearly seen the future for e-commerce and see the e-commerce, how that will impact the whole entire retail. I think with that vision, they strategically invested in Yihaodian 2 years ago, and now we're finding lots of synergies. For example, global sourcing and O2O, new business models, etc. We are launching new O2O business model together. So it's good, right?
Okay, so that's very interesting. If we think about the stylized rendering of joint ventures in China, it's the Chinese government asking a Western firm to come in because China wants the intellectual property and the know-how of that firm. Think about automobile companies are a classic example. You're suggesting that we're actually in a pivot point now where Western firms might learn from Chinese firms and take Chinese business models more globally.